Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So today's guest is another one of those entrepreneurs that is part of this curated mastermind group that I'm a part of. And one of the reasons why I love to bring these people on this show is because they have a number of different unique talents, gifts, and abilities that add so much value not only to my life, but to the entire entrepreneurial community. Many times when we're talking about the value that people bring to a community, especially of high performing entrepreneurs, it's easy to think that it just comes down to just marketing strategy or sales strategy or anything related to growth strategy. But when we really look at ourselves, we are intellectual athletes. And it's our ability to be able to make decisions. It's our ability to be able to perform that ultimately dictate how well we are able to grow our businesses and reach our goals and so forth. So today I want to bring you a friend, a guest, a gentleman who is a doctor. He's an entrepreneur. He's an author, all around just brilliant individual, Dr. Diva Nagula. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
No worries. Now, your background is actually quite diverse, and there's a lot that I could say. You cover so many different perspectives and across the board from, again, being the entrepreneur, being an author, having, cancer at one point and your journey through there. Give me your stage pitch. Who are you?
I have transformed so many different ways in so many different times over the last decade. And it's funny enough, I'm turning 50 in 2 weeks. And I look back and I'm so grateful for all the lessons that I've learned in the decade of the 40s. It's been the most challenging decade of my entire life. I've been through it all. And, I've been through personal turmoil, when it comes to health. I've been through entrepreneurial turmoil when it comes to business. I've been through personal challenges, with marriage, divorce, and then constant health challenges. I've been suffering from long COVID for the last 2 years. And while all this is happening, I'm also transforming myself into a more well-rounded individual. I'm leaving that whole aspect of being in my masculine and really trying very hard to balance the feminine and masculine within me. And that's been really challenging because in life and in our society, we're all rewarded for being in our masculine behavior or masculine persona. And more or less, the feminine archetype isn't rewarded. Most of the time it's being like pushed down. And so part of the thing that I do for myself and I teach my clients is like, what does it mean to be feminine? What does it mean to be masculine? And that's what we came into this world as beings that are heart-centered. And because of the influence of our parents and society, we formed an ego where we're more in our masculine, and in entrepreneurs specifically, we have this like go-getting, type of mentality and stay strong and never like give within, never give up and just stay the course. And, that had a role on my health. And so that's kind of where I am now. It's just rediscovering who I am.
I get that. First of all, I want to commend you for your transparency and your vulnerability. It takes a lot of courage. So we've all gone through entrepreneurial turmoils and challenges and so forth. It's never just straight up, right? I had a gentleman of mine, he once mentored Tony Robbins, and he asked me a whole bunch of questions about my journey. And I had gone through so many different journeys, the ups and the downs and whatnot. And he came back and said to me, the number one attribute of the most successful people that I've ever met throughout my entire life comes down to their ability to adapt and evolve. And that was the one thing that I happen to be really good at, which sounds like, you're good at too, is your ability to adapt and evolve as factors and competitors and technologies and whatnot changes. We're going to see a lot of people forced to adapt with AI and what's happening in technology on that end. So the other comment that I want to make based on what you mentioned on the challenges. So you had cancer. You know the impact that cancer can have. But what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who don't prioritize their health or maybe going through challenges themselves?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very in-depth question, which I'm happy to answer. we need to prioritize ourselves and what makes us happy and what fills our cup. When I say what fills our cup is we're doing things that basically things that we enjoy, things that we love. We're operating from a cup that's full versus the cup that's empty. When we're running and working all hours of the night, burning the midnight oil, and we're not nourishing ourselves, we tend to deplete our cup. And then when we're in a state of depletion, we're running on fumes. And that's when what happens is we kick into disease function, because other things are starting to take place in our bodies. We start to deteriorate. We start lacking sleep. We start lacking proper nourishment when it comes to food. And it's all about a balance. We can work, 80 hours a week, but then we need to also play and also make sure that we're nourished by loved ones and not facing loneliness. Because a lot of times entrepreneurship can be very lonely. Only people that really understand entrepreneurs is entrepreneurs. So I lost sight of my whole livelihood of why I went into medicine, simply because I was more interested in the entrepreneurship and of business and making money and succeeding. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but it was a turn that I took. And during that turn, I neglected simple things. I neglected taking care of myself. And a lot of people ask me, well, if they're to do one thing to help their health while they're in a entrepreneurship or just anyone in general, it's really, a couple of things. Learn to understand your nervous system. When we're in a heightened nervous system state, where we're just sympathetic, fight or flight, it's like that state when we're being run down by a mountain lion, that's a fight or flight state. But a lot of people get into that state for unnecessary reasons, stress, overworked, and not having enough sleep. And that nervous system is not meant to be in that heightened state for long periods of time. We're meant to have a balance, and we're more meant to be in a parasympathetic or a rest or digest. So for me, I was constantly in this fight or flight state, and I operated like that. That was my drive. Like I was the guy that did everything. I wore all the hats in my business. It burned me out, obviously. And as a result, I started to eat horribly. And that's a big problem with our society. We are all about a quick fix, like eating whatever is fast and quickly, eating our food within 15 minutes, because that's all the time that we have as entrepreneurs to eat. And I used to think that eating Subway was actually more healthier than McDonald's because it had more greens in it. And there were signs also about my health that I just never paid attention. And so the one thing that I would recommend people to do if they're really interested in changing their health is stop eating processed foods, eat more organic foods. Processed foods has loaded with toxins, which is really awful for our body. So it's really about nourishing our body with proper foods. And then when we're nourishing our body, we're also trying to nourish our soul as well. And that's what I lacked too. I was very devoid of community when I was working really hard. And there's a quote that says that loneliness is as much of a risk factor for mortality as having diabetes or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so for me, it was a recipe for disaster. And, I was 7.5 years is how long I stayed in my business before I exited and sold it. And a year later is when I got struck with cancer.
Back in the day, I was told that the secret to success was hard work. I would bring myself to a point where, I worked 7 days a week. I was committed. Nobody was going to outwork me. If that's the secret to success, nobody is going to outwork me. So I worked until my brain just would no longer function. I just couldn't form a sentence. I was so exhausted, but I still couldn't sleep in my bed because the stress level was so high. My diet was definitely not optimal diet. And I started feeling this pain radiating up from the base of my spine all the way up into my head. And the doctors told me that my organs they were all shutting down. The stress, the lack of sleep, everything was literally killing me. And that was a pivotal part in my life because I knew that the secret to success was not hard work, and that wasn't what was going to get me there, number one. And then I also realized, what am I doing all this for? What am I really doing all this for? It was later in life that I realized that as we build our business, there are two ways that you can go about doing it. You can either design the business that you want and you create the business, or the business creates you. And if we're intentional And we say, look, here's my non-negotiables. So here is what must be true for me. And we build a business around what must be true. For me, I want to be able to work from home so that I can be there with my kids. I want to be able to take my weekends completely off and not work weekends. I want to have my evenings with my kids, my dinner with my wife and kids, and so forth. Like those are my non-negotiables. And you know what? It's non-traditional for the size of the company that we have. We should have an office and employees, everybody working indoors and whatnot. But I have to realize, what am I willing to give up in order to get what I want? And, I build the business that I want. So I have power. I didn't let the power escape to my business, and then I become enslaved to my business. And like you talk about making sure that cup is full. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today. One of my coaches called me up and said, I need some help advising a client of ours who is completely burnt out right now. And how do we address this? And so my feedback was like, look, there are things that you do that give you energy. And as long as you continue to do the things that give you energy, that's going to allow you to extend your battery life that much longer. So that's the first thing that you have to look at when it comes to that burnout. Like, what are you doing? You talked about delegating earlier. Delegate the things that are just energy suckers that you don't enjoy. Get that off your plate. And then do the stuff that you enjoy. But even still, there's only so much that you can do. All the things that you enjoy, it just extends your battery life. It doesn't keep your battery full. At some point, you have to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to disconnect and I need to recharge that battery. And when you charge that battery, you're going to find that your capacity to think as a decision maker begins to expand. You become more creative. You become a better critical thinker, which is why some of the best thinkers in the world got their ideas either in the shower, in those moments when they had just barely fallen asleep. And for me, my most valuable thought often come when I am walking the beach in total silence with my feet in the sands, kicking the water, and just letting my brain wander. And then all of a sudden, something happens. And then I'll pull my phone out of my pocket and I'll just start talking into my phone. And I'll just capture the idea. And then I'll just expand and expand and expand. Oftentimes, we put too much emphasis on the actual work part, the actual sitting behind our computer part, and not enough emphasis as an intellectual athlete on the importance of that recovery.
And I love that, the intellectual athlete. It makes total sense. I like to think of it as bandwidth. It's when our bandwidth is completely saturated. Like, what do we do to be able to give up some room to allow more bandwidth in our lives? And you hit the nail on the head. Being out in nature is the most wonderful thing to allow us to ground, to allow us to sync up with the frequency of the earth. And that is a wonderful frequency that also opens up our heart center. And when our heart center is open and we're out of our heads, guess what happens? Ideas, insights, downloads. And that's the beautiful thing. And if we're sitting here behind a computer, like grinding, and we're using our intellectual capacity to its max and we have no bandwidth, well, guess what? There's no room for anything to come through. And if we're constantly just in a position where we're running on with a low battery or a cup is depleted, we're never going to get to that point where we need those ahas and those beautiful moments that can transform this or transform other people's lives. And that's the very important point. And that's all about the balance that we were talking about at the beginning of the show.
One of our mutual friends, Doug, who wrote the book Driven, he works with high performing CEOs. And one of the exercises that he uses is meditation. Now, if you told me years ago that meditation had to be a critical part of being a top performer, I would have said, look, man, what other wacky tobacco you're smoking, because, meditation isn't going to help me get that much further in life. That's just crazy talk. I'm going to get back to work. But again, when you look at yourself as an intellectual athlete, and then when you study other top performers, like there's a reason why the most intellectually challenging roles in Wall Street, those individuals often attribute some of their best aha moments to coming either during or immediately after meditation. And I'm like, wow, if you say meditation, then maybe. But I did realize it was in those moments, not when I was trying to think of an answer or solution or anything else, but it was in those moments. All of a sudden, something happened, and I'm going, wait a minute, where was that answer the whole time? I spent the last 3 weeks trying to solve something, and I couldn't do it. And then I'm in this meditation, and the answer came right away. It
What
allows that declutterness. Go ahead.
what type of meditation do you do? And the reason why I ask is that most people that I see as clients or that I encounter, I'll offer them, different modalities to get into a parasympathetic rest and digest state, meditation being one of them. And in the beginning, when I was teaching this, everyone had the same reaction. I can't sit down and do it right, because their monkey mind is going, crazy. I can't sit 15 minutes and because too many thoughts keep running through. This is kind of how I transition my clients. I'll start them with binaural beats. And binaural beats is when you listen to music and they have two different frequencies in your ears that are playing. So, for example, you have 100 hertz in one ear and 110 in the other ear. The brain can't listen to both. So what it does, it cancels that out. So you're listening to 10 hertz. So what that is the alpha state. And then some frequencies even get into where you're in a theta state. And this actually quiets the brain down and mimics a meditative state. I call it the lazy man's way of meditating. Once they've calmed down their brains, get into more of a relaxed state, they have more bandwidth and they're able to achieve more. After a couple of weeks, I'll then start introducing them to breath work. And it's not like this crazy breath work technique, it's nothing crazy at all. It's simply just being able to take a deep breath, engage in the diaphragm, and then breathe out. And if you're doing it correctly, within 3 or 4 breaths, you're able to feel this immense amount of relaxation. Do that, several times a day. It breaks up the day. It's almost like a dosing. It's a prescription when I give them. I say, do this 4 times a day, every single day, and see me back in 2 weeks and see what happens. And then I'll increase their frequency of that. Then I'll finally get them into a meditation without the music. And they say, almost 100% of the time, it's like, it's so much easier to get into meditation now. I can just stay still and thoughts come through, but I can quiet my mind a lot faster and a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that has worked a lot because most people who I see, their monkey minds are just going because they're just driven individuals that don't have any bandwidth. And they just say, I want the next best thing, but I can't sit down and do it because they can't quiet their mind or they're too afraid of doing it wrong. And I'm like, no, it's not that way at all. And then this pattern that I teach typically works almost all the time.
Yeah. So I've tried transcendental meditation. That seems to be one of the more popular ones. It's this constant repetition of a particular mantra for the listeners who have never done it before. And that does make it a little bit easier for somebody like myself because it gives me something to do by constantly repeating the mantra versus if I just sit there and close my eyes, I get really stressed and I can't actually sit there anymore. It's counterproductive. So that works well, though it takes me a little bit longer to get in that meditative state because I am stressed. Like, why am I sitting here? I got so much stuff to do. It takes me a little bit longer, but I do enjoy it. That's been the most popular one. Your experience of talking in one ear and then something in another ear. I went to Bora Bora with Tony Robbins, and my wife and I did a meditation session with him, and we did this oneness meditation. And at one point, Tony was speaking in one of my ears, and Sage, his wife, was speaking in the other one of my ears. And so I kind of experienced a little bit of the two-sidedness, and that was a completely wild, crazy, almost out of body type of experience, which I really, really enjoyed. I mean, that put me, I felt like I was in an awakened meditative state that lasted days afterwards. It was amazing. But there's so many different ways I feel like we can get in a meditative state. I had some kava, which is a very relaxing, took some kava, then went for that walk on the beach. And it was just like, that's another way that I've meditated. Just as long as my mind just quiets. I kind of like, that's my definition of meditation. As long as you allow your mind to wander, and you obviously have much more qualified view than I have on it, but that's sort of where I get value is if my mind is allowed to wander and I can just let it wander, that in my mind is quality meditation.
Yeah. And that's Again, meditation can take many forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be sitting with your legs crossed in a corner of your house. And I agree. To me, one of the most rewarding experiences where my mind can quiet without doing really anything is being in nature. And I
Yeah.
was in Costa Rica for the first time this year in January where we had met. And I was somewhere else before then. I was in the jungle of Costa Rica. And it's something about just being away from just the city life that I live in now. When we live in the cities, we have the stress of our work as one aspect of stress, but we also have the stress of what's hitting our electromagnetic field, like our bodies,
Yeah.
whether it's 5G, EMF radiation, all this adds stress to our bodies,
Yeah.
including the work stress that we have, along with the toxicity that we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. For me, when I go out in nature, it literally takes me 1 to 2 days to detox. And then after 2 days, it's like, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just synced up with nature. I'm one with nature. I'm with that frequency of the earth. And that's how I am able to like just release and relax. And normally when I go into these conferences, I'm like wound up because I want to be like on to be able to converse and like talk to people and just be my best self. I didn't really feel like I had to try because I was already in that state days before coming to the event. And
Sure.
it was just beautiful. And so you're fortunate where you have the beach and the water where you can use that as your meditation, as your quiet time that just decompresses you. And that's what it really boils down to is what in your life where you can decompress on a regular daily basis. If you're not doing it daily or half the day, then you're in the other state where it's parasympathetic and being in fight or flight. So it's all about that balance. I mean, obviously, we don't want to be in that, relaxed state 24/7. There's a balance. And so for me, it's getting away from the city. It's going into, you know, places like Costa Rica or anywhere where I'm just really enveloped in nature.
You bring up a really good good point. And yeah, it's funny. There's so many different definitions when it comes to work-life balance, right? I mean, I was in a seminar one time and Tom Brady came to speak and, he said, if you really want to be the best, you have to be willing to throw your life out of balance. Work-life balance is a myth perpetrated by average people. And his definition of balance, I totally understood that because a traditional definition of balance means that you have to be perfect in all these different areas of your life. But from what I hear you talking about, I think we can almost come up with our own definition of balance because balance, in my definition, and I'd be curious to see if you would agree with this, is that you have a battery over the course of the day. At the end of the day, you want that battery to be full. Go to bed with a full battery.
100%.
So if you've busted your ass all day, what are you doing either during the day to balance out what's taking out your energy and putting it back in so that you keep that constant battery charged throughout the day? Or do you leave enough time towards the end of the day to charge that battery so you go to bed with a full battery and start all over again? For me, I see that as balance. It doesn't mean that well, you spend 8 hours working. That means you have to spend the next 8 hours doing this and that. No. For some people, it's just go for a walk along the wherever outside. I have a friend of mine, a very successful entrepreneur, runs 3 very successful restaurants. He said every day without fail, he has to walk into his backyard and they have a trail throughout the woods. And I forget how long he said it was, but it takes him maybe 20, 30 minutes to walk through the trail. And he said, I have to do it every day. I just have to go for a walk in the woods, in the trail. And that's how he charges his battery and ready to tackle on the day.
In this world, it's interesting because when I was in entrepreneurship, there wasn't this biohacking community that existed. And I am very grateful for a lot of the biohackers who come up with these ways of stacking modalities to optimize. But a lot of this is optimization where our battery's already depleted. So we're just inking out more, you know, to see if we can get some more stuff done. For example, the cold plunge. I think it has wonderful merits. However, when we're talking about entrepreneurs who are driving so hard, our adrenal glands, which is where the cortisol is produced, which cortisol functions to suppress inflammation and also drives up our nervous system. Our adrenal glands are already taxed. And so what we do when we get up in the morning and we jump into a cold plunge, for example, or whatever it may be, it's a 300% of an increase in cortisol in our bodies. So if we already have adrenal glands that are already damaged and are already not producing cortisol sufficiently, we're just taxing more of our adrenal glands to do more when it should be just resting. And so they always talk about the benefits of cold plunge, and it's great. But I think in small doses, it could be great. But people who use this thing every single day, I worry about their adrenal gland. So
Mm.
I always talk about that with people that come see me as clients. It's like, well, I'm going to go buy all the cold plunge, buy this, buy that, and get on the best nootropics. No, before we do that, let's learn ways to decompress. Like what you said, let's learn to keep our batteries full organically. You
Yeah.
know, let's go back to nature. Let's do something, walk on a trail, go on a hike. These are just simple things that are free. They don't cost anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I know we're pushing up against the clock. I want to be respectful of your time. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say would be your biggest, best tip for the CEOs and leaders listening in, wanting to know what can they do to take their business beyond seven figures?
Yeah, I think it's all about a balance, learning what keeps your cup full or your battery charged at all times of the day so that you can fulfill and do all your obligations and be at your 100% all the time.
Awesome. I love that. Again, we've talked about so many different things. That's a beautiful thing about these podcasts is when we start, I never really know what direction it's going to take us in. We could have talked about your entrepreneurial journey and, what you did in the strategies and tactics to have that massive win, back in the day. We could have talked about the challenges that you faced and, how you've learned to overcome them. But at the end of the day, we took an angle of the intellectual athlete. Quite frankly, if you were to look at all the different aspects that we could have talked about, what makes the biggest impact in the long-term success of a business, it's going to be you as the leader, as the decision maker, your ability as an intellectual athlete to be able to make effective decisions. When we go beyond seven figures, there are two schools of thought. There's grow at all costs, and there's sustainable growth. Those who are committed to growing at all costs, they oftentimes don't realize is 66% of those companies made it on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list within 5 to 8 years of first getting listed will shrink in size, go out of business, or be disadvantageously sold for a number of reasons, largely attributed to a growth at all costs type of mentality. When we start thinking about sustainable growth, you can still grow fast, as many companies do, as many of our clients have done. But it's about what's required to not just get on the growth tracks, but stay there. And it does require a different mindset and a different mentality, both internally as well as externally as well. So, Dr. Diva Nagula, I really appreciate you being here. People want to learn more about you, the work that you do, the book that you have out there. Where do we take them?
Yeah, you can find me at divanagula.com. And my book is called From Doctor to Patient, Healing Cancer Through Mind, Body, and Spirit. And you can find that on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And again, for all our listeners that are looking for more ways to scale and grow your business, remember to check us out over at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudette with my friend Diva Nagula, and I will see you in another episode.